All right. Let's take it to the side. Okay. Oh, no props. I'm fine. Yeah, thank you. I once heard of a woman who found a really good friendship at around my age, a friendship that lasted until the end of her life, the rest of her life, basically. Shows never too late to find a good friend, to find a true friend. And what happened was that this woman was actually at the grave of her son who just died at the age of 34. And she was there, and there was another woman also there nearby at a grave site mourning her son. And they got to talking a little bit. And but that was that. They got a good chance to share, comfort each other. And she thought, oh, that was a good chance encounter. The next time she came to the gravesite, and I guess she went there fairly often. It was a week or so later. Next time she came to the gravesite, she found there was a rock that was nearby. She found a slip of paper sticking out. She picked it up and read the paper. It was from that woman. And it was an inspiring, encouraging note from her. So what she did was she wrote a note and stuck it under the rock. And then I guess the woman came and read it and left her another note. And they communicated back and forth that way. Obviously, they're not in the internet age, or they didn't know how to use email or Messenger or any of that stuff. But they communicated like that back and forth for a long time. Even after they become friends in real life, meeting face to face, they still continue to exchange notes. And that friendship became a lifelong friendship. Often we read this passage and we don't think of friendship because we think of the word neighbor. And we give it a certain meaning. And if you really think about it, Jesus actually says, and the Bible, scriptures, even Old Testament says, hey, love your neighbor as yourself. What does that mean? That actually means that if there's a neighbor that you love that much, wouldn't that be your friend? I sure hope so. I hope that you don't look at them and say, no, you live next to me, you cannot be my friend. You're a neighbor. Even though I love you, you're still a neighbor, not a friend. Well, no. If you're going to love somebody that much, that person becomes your friend, right? And in fact, Jesus in this passage redefines who a neighbor is. And that's going to be one of the things we look at. Now, how many of you would like to have a true friend? We do, right? I tell you what, in this day and age, we all would say we do. But here's something that we subtly do that makes us not value friendship as much. Not so much what we subtly do, but more that we are programmed to think. You see, we're in a society in which we overvalue romance and I dare say sex, and undervalue friendship. Why is that? Well, I've mentioned it before. It's been quite a while now since there's an industry that's far bigger than Hollywood. If those who have listened to me say it before, you remember what that industry is? 10 times. In fact, right now it's probably way more than 10 times the size of Hollywood's revenues. What industry is that? Anyone? In fact, when I first started quoting this statistic, Google was not in that business. How does Google make their money primarily? Ads, advertising. 10, 15 years ago already, before Google became an advertising giant, the advertising industry was already more than 10 times the size of Hollywood's revenues. And today, it's even bigger with all the online ads and all of that. And guess what advertising tries to do? Tries to get you to do something that you didn't want to do before you saw the ad, right? So in a way, it's in the business of manipulating, right? That's precisely what it is, okay? And there is a bit of good in it. It helps us get the right product at times, right? But the industry, by and large, is trying to sell something, and whether you need it or not. And now, the ad industry has long discovered the link between selling products and romance and sex. So you have this huge industry kind of pushing this idea. Now, not all marketing use that idea, and not all marketing is manipulative. But however, that is actually a big part of the industry, right? And so because of that, I think we are programmed to overvalue romance, and because of that, undervalue friendships. It's really easy for us to buy into this idea that that romance is valued higher than friendship. And if you really think about it, it might not be hard for you to find examples of such things amongst your circles. And for example, I hear far more the lament of young people in private. They don't always, sometimes in public. Some people do say it fairly publicly. The lament that they don't have a romantic relationship. I rarely hear anybody lament that they don't have a good friendship. And in reality, the Bible tells us that it is possible that some people are called to not have a romantic relationship. But everybody needs a friendship. So if you were to ask me which one is more fundamental to life, I'd say friendship is more fundamental to life. And a romance is maybe you need it, maybe you don't, according to God, according to God's word, right? But in our society, we've been programmed to think the other way. We've been programmed to think that it's more important to have a romance and less important to have a true friendship. And so I hope that we will indeed think about the idea of friendship, the idea of finding a true friend, and how important that actually is, right? And so that's something that we want to look at. You notice that one of the first things that Jesus talks about when he was asked this, of course he says, well, what is the law? That's just the background, okay? And notice that he says, love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your strength, with all your mind. That's what the teacher of the law says. And love your neighbor as yourself. And Jesus says, you're right. And notice this line that he says, do this and you will live. Do this and you will live. What do you think is meant by Jesus when he said, you will live? Was he alive? This teacher? Yes. This was a person who was very much alive in the normal sense of the word. So when Jesus says, do this and you will live, he obviously doesn't mean that you will breathe and you will be able to eat and walk and talk and all that stuff, right? He didn't mean do this and you will be alive, or maybe he did. Maybe he meant alive in a different way, right? Do this and you will live. You will truly live. What is truly living anyways? Right? What is truly living? In this day and age, many people will think about their lives and they'll think, I'm not truly living. I'm alive, but I'm not truly living. Jesus says, do this and you will truly live. You will truly be alive. Do what it says there. And then there's this very interesting interchange that included the parable of the Good Samaritan, which is obviously very famous and everybody knows it. I knew about it when I was a little kid, not from the Bible, but from some children's book that I read that wasn't even religious. Okay? Lots of people, if you go out there and say the word Good Samaritan, people know what you mean. They may or may not know the whole story, but they know something about the story, and they know what a Good Samaritan means, right? This is so well known. But the interchange that Jesus has with him starts with the man wanting to justify himself. And so he asks a question. The question that he asks is, and who is my neighbor? And who is my neighbor? It's very interesting that the Bible says, Luke says that he asked that question in order to justify himself, right? And Jesus' answer is really weird, if you really think about it. I don't know if you catch on to it. You caught on to it. He's asking, who is my neighbor, so that I should go and love my neighbor as myself, right? Because that's the context of what they were talking about, right? So saying, okay, I have to love my neighbor as myself. So who is my neighbor? Who do I have to love, right? And Jesus ends up answering with not who's the person who needs you to love. It's your neighbor. He answers with who is being the neighbor, right? Now, let's look at that. Interestingly, how is asking who is my neighbor a way of trying to justify himself? How is that a way of trying to justify himself? Have you ever thought about this? You've read this passage many times. How is that a way of trying to justify himself? If I tell you, you have to love your neighbor as yourself, if somebody tells all of us, we have to love our neighbor as ourselves, and then I say, and who is my neighbor? What do you think? How do you think I'm trying to justify myself?
Not everyone is your neighbor.
Yeah, not everyone's my neighbor. So, I'm hoping that your answer gives me, something narrow enough that I can say, I'm already doing it, right? That's what this guy was hoping for. He was hoping Jesus to say, okay, those people who live right next to you, they're your neighbor. And he can say, oh yeah, I already do that. I care for them, right? Or maybe he was hoping Jesus to say, oh, everybody have a really tight circle of friends. Those 3 or 4 friends that you have, that's it. We all know that Jesus has, his 3 favorite disciples, the closest ones to him, right? That he brings everywhere. Maybe this guy is hoping, he'll say maybe just the 3 closest people to you. Then they're your neighbor. And if you love them, you're done. Then he can say, hey, I'm justified because I'm already doing that, right? However, Jesus gave a very different answer. The answer he gave wasn't so much that the neighbor is someone who, with a certain characteristic and a certain qualification that meets your criteria to be a neighbor. Instead, the neighbor is whoever you have to care about, whoever you choose to care about. Because that's what the Samaritan did, right? He chose to care about somebody who didn't live anywhere near him, whom he didn't know. In fact, whom he knows belongs to a group of people who are prejudiced against himself and his people. You know all that background, I don't have to tell you, right? So this was not somebody that would qualify with any criteria, right? That says that's a neighbor, that's a friend, that's a relative, that's whatever. There is a connection with. There is no connection. And in fact, if there is a connection, it's a negative one. These are the people, he belongs to the people who hate us, who calls us half-breeds, right? And that's the neighbor. Jesus said, that's the neighbor. You go and do likewise, right? That's the answer. And that tells us one very, very important thing. What it says is that to find a true friend, to find a true neighbor, you go and be a good friend, be a good neighbor. If you really want to have a true friend, if you've recognized the importance of a true friend in your life, go and be a good friend to somebody. That's how you will find a true friend. That's what Jesus is saying. Okay? And it's easy for us to be to find a true friend by looking for a true friend. Isn't that what we imply? When we say to find something, we simply look for it. And to look for it, we take the position of we just have to discover somebody who is already has the potential, has the characteristic of a true friend. I just got to find that person, but that person's already there. They already exist. Okay? And maybe I'll go further and say, God, send me a true friend. Send me a good friend. Help me to run into that good person. Right? But no, Jesus is saying, no, that's not how it works. You want a true friend? You be a good friend first. That's how you discover a true friend. That's how you discover that's how you find true friendship. Right? And it's not something that Jesus just says out of thin air. You see, this thing that the Samaritan did, that's what Jesus did, isn't it? If you think about the parable of the Good Samaritan, it's actually Jesus' story, isn't it? It's Jesus saying, the priest is not going to save you. At one level, there's another level which I'll tell you about. At one level, it says the priest is not going to save you. The temple worship is not going to save you. The Levite's not going to save you. Your religious practices are not going to save you. What ultimately ends up saving you is for somebody that you've been rebellious against, for somebody that you have turned away from all those hundreds of years, from somebody that kept calling you back, but you kept turning away. You come a little bit and then you turn away. For somebody that you've mistreated even. You've killed his prophets. You've done all kinds of things to him. For that person to go out of his way to come to you and to bind up your wounds and to heal you and to save you. In many ways, the Good Samaritan is Jesus. It is God who is a Good Samaritan, who comes to us, who goes out of a way when other things that we might look to help us, to save us, have failed. And he is the one who comes. He is the true friend. And he makes true friends of us by being a good friend himself, to start with. He comes to us. He's not talking out of thin air. He's saying, this is how it's supposed to work. And let me demonstrate it. This is how it works. I'm going to come to you when you're lying on the side of the road, half dead. Isn't that where we were when we were sinners on our way? Choosing our own road to destruction? That's how we were. We were on the road half dead. And there is Jesus going out of his way, coming to us, binding up our wounds, carrying us, putting us on his donkey and taking us to his inn, paying for us. You see all the signs that that's Jesus, that's God? And he says, do what I do. You want to find a true friend? Do what I do. Be a true friend. Show others the kind of love that I have shown you. Gospel of John records Jesus saying, love one another as I have loved you. And that is how it's supposed to work, right? You want a true friend, be a true friend. But to be a true friend, there's a couple of challenges that is shown. And that's at another level, the priest and the Levite shows us these two challenges. But I want to turn us to something that actually was done in real life. Did you know that they tried this Good Samaritan things in real life? There's a thing called Good Samaritan experiment. Has anybody heard of it? You have? I might have mentioned it one time when I was here. I actually don't remember. But there is such a thing called a Good Samaritan experiment. It was done at Princeton, at the seminary at Princeton. Princeton, you guys know, right? One of the foremost universities in the world, one of the Ivy League universities in the States. It was done at Princeton. It was not just any part of Princeton. It was done at the seminary. So they had this little experiment where they asked students to come. And they asked seminary students to come. And, well, who are seminary students, just in case? Christians, first of all. And second of all, what are they studying to become? Theologians, pastors, right? along those lines, right? So yeah, so there you are. You have a bunch of students who are studying to be theologians, pastors, so on. They say, okay, we need students to do an experiment. And well, of course, they always pay them, right? So students come because they're poor and they need money. And they need, I remember, what did I need? Macaroni and cheese, instant noodles. So I'd go for these experiments, right? I go, hey, it pays me $10, I'll go do an experiment. So the students come, they do an experiment. They're told that what you have to do is you have to kind of do some tests at one building, okay? And then you have another task to do. And once they're done the test, they're told that their task is to go to another building. And they're told either one of two tasks. So they split the students into two groups. One group of the students said they're just supposed to go over there and answer another questionnaire about their future career, okay, their future vocation. Okay? The other half of the students are told that they're supposed to go to the other building to share a short message about the Good Samaritan passage, this very passage right here, Luke 10. Okay? So they're told to do that. Okay? And so they figure that their experiment is about writing, the questionnaires and doing the task, and then they'll study them. What they don't realize is that the real experiment actually happens on the way between the two buildings. On the way, in a path that they have to go by, they've staged a man slumped over on the ground, looking like he's hurt. And as the student goes by, he would moan and he would cough a couple of times. And he's lying on the ground, clearly looking like he's hurt, right? So they've staged the whole Good Samaritan thing right there. And they want to see how many of these students actually stop and help. And they have different variables that they want to measure. What variables actually affect whether somebody would be a Good Samaritan or not? Okay, let me ask you guys. How many of you would like to think that you would be a Good Samaritan? Would like to think. I'm not saying that you will. You would like to think that you can be. Oh, come on. Don't we all aspire to be the Good Samaritan? You guys, be honest. You want to be, okay? You're just not sure that you can pull it off, right? Exactly. He's honest. He put it away. I want to be, but I'm not sure that I can pull it off, right? Yes, so we all aspire to be, okay? But what if I tell you that there's a couple of really easily controllable parameters that somebody can tweak, and that can turn you either from a Good Samaritan to a bad or from a bad to good. If you have that, given that you have that desire to be one, okay? Because I hope that we actually all do have that desire and that aspiration that to want to be a Good Samaritan, right? But we fail at times. But why? Do you understand why? This experiment found two very interesting parameters that tells us what determines whether we'll actually live that out or whether we would not. Interestingly, in this experiment, a majority of the students did not stop. We're talking about seminary students. We're talking about people who know this, who probably even preached on this passage like me. And they were very comfortable when asked, oh, you have to go to the other building and give a message about the Good Samaritan passage, because they know it by heart, right? And here's the interesting thing. Most of them walked right by. Some of them apparently even stepped over the guy to get to the other place. And they found there was no difference between the people who were asked to go to the other building to fill out a questionnaire about vocation versus those who were supposed to talk about a Good Samaritan passage. That shows us something very important. It shows us that having the theology, having the Bible verses in your mind at the moment still doesn't help. It made no difference. It made zero difference. The statistics were the same in the two groups. It made no difference. And that's a warning to us. Okay? Knowing the Bible is important. It's necessary, but not sufficient. Don't say that Pastor Lou says that knowledge is not important. Okay? Knowledge is very important, but you can't just stay with knowledge. right? Having that knowledge does not guarantee that you'll live it out. In fact, it has very little impact, apparently, on whether somebody lives it out. This experiment shows it. Guess what made a difference? What made a difference was this. Some of the students were told that they have 15 minutes to get to the other building. Plenty of time. Some of the students were told they had 5 minutes to get to the other building, which is very tight. Some of the students were told they're already late. Guess what? That made the biggest difference. How rushed we are. You see, if you look at the priest, ultimately that is the issue. Now, some of you know the background, and you know that the priest walked around. Why? Why? Jesus didn't say, but what's most likely why was the reason that the priest kind of stayed away from that guy and walked around him. Huh? Yes, uncleanliness. There's a holiness. There is a law about touching dead bodies for priests. Because if they touched a dead body, they become unclean, and it's going to take them 10 days of cleansing before they can do their stuff again, do their work again, right? So what does that mean? That means a huge delay, a whole lot of effort and a huge delay, isn't it? Okay? What this experiment found out, Jesus was trying to tell us 2,000 years ago in this parable. He says, if you're in a hurry, if you're worried about your stuff being delayed, you're not going to be a good friend. You're not going to find a true friend. This is one thing that we have to watch out for in this day and age. We're always rushing around so much, right? We're always thinking about what I have to do. We're always thinking I can't be delayed. And when we do that, we can't be a true friend. We can't be a good friend. I find that about myself. If someone messages me and I'm in the middle of rushing from one place to another or going from one appointment to another, and sometimes I make the mistake of answering them, what I mean is I make the mistake of trying to answer them. And I type something real quick and I send it, and then later on, after I've done whatever I've done, I go look, okay, what did I say to this person? I go, response, but it was not a good response, right? So, it wasn't anything horrible, but it came across as, I read it and I go, wow, it comes across as you can tell, it comes across as rushed, right? What I'm trying to do these days, not always succeeding because I still forget and I kind of rush the response, partly because I think it's important, right? Because I think that person is important, the issue is important, so I don't want to delay. What I've learned now is if I'm truly in that position where I can't wait, it's better off just to say, rushing to someplace right now, or I'm in the middle of something, let me answer you in a bit, and then write a really good response later, right? I notice that when I get good responses from my friend. I'm much happier if they did that, and then later on write me a really good thought out, something that showed they cared, that they thought about it, rather than something they just rushed. You can tell. I can tell. So now I realize other people can tell when I'm rushing responses, right? We can't be a good friend if we're rushing. Take our time. And I know that there are times when we can't stop, right? I understand that because we're in the middle of something, we're on the way to something else, we're driving, whatever. Then say something so that the person doesn't worry, because you want to be reassuring. I understand that too. So you reassure them that you care and that you're going to respond. And then you do a better response. Better yet, take your time to meet with somebody, right? Take your time to talk to people on the phone or face to face. We've lost the art of that. Pick up the phone. Interestingly, that was something that I learned in the secular world from other people I worked with. I worked in the secular world when email started to come in. And when email started to first come in, there were all kinds of problems. You know why? Because you can't show emotions properly. And there was a time when nobody knew about emojis. And I remember we had to send out a memo to the company, and I was just as bad as anyone else. But somebody discovered emojis, and we had to, that was a time when you had to actually type them with characters, colon, right bracket. You don't choose emojis. They're not graphical, right? The first time I saw them, I thought, what in the world is that colon dash right bracket? And someone said, turn it sideways. Oh, no, the other way. Oh. Oh! So we had to tell people that, right? What I learned was there were often problems because people misread the emotions in emails. People in the company were getting into, arguments and getting all riled up because how they read the emails. And I remember one time, the first time I learned it, it kind of hit me like a rock. It never even hit me because you're busy doing all these emails and you're reading some of them going, oh, that doesn't sound right. Gee, why is that guy so, so arrogant, so whatever, right? And then you're getting ready to reply, right? And then one time I was getting to reply to this guy. And he calls me on the phone in, real life voice. And we talked. And I realized, hearing what he was saying, oh, I read the email all wrong. Talk to somebody, right? Call people. Don't be afraid to call. See people face to face. Spend that time. Don't rush, right? If you're going to be a good friend, don't rush. That's very important. The second thing is, the Levite. Why did the Levite go around? The Levite was not under the same prohibition about touching dead bodies. Okay? And Jesus doesn't tell us why. We don't know why, but we do know that Levites are actually people who work in the temple. And priests come from the tribe of Levites, right? Okay, so let me speculate a little bit, okay? My speculation is this is a Levite who, although not a priest, cared a lot about the priestly things. Maybe he wants to be a priest. He had a priority in his mind. Okay? He has certain priorities. And helping that person, being a good neighbor, being a good friend, is not just his priority. Maybe his priority is even to become a priest. So he wants to practice the priestly duties, even though he wasn't bound to it. Or maybe simply that he was in a rush because he has some other priorities that he has to deal with, right? And rushing and priorities are related, so I put the two together, okay? So if you're in a rush, or if you think that you have something that's higher priority than loving your neighbor as yourself, then you will not be a good friend. If you really think about it, interestingly, what are the greatest commandments? Right there, right? What it tells us is that all our priorities are secondary to the greatest commandment, to loving your neighbor as yourself. And if we start putting other priorities higher than loving our neighbors and being a good friend, being a good neighbor, then we know that we've got our priorities wrong, because God's made it very clear which is the higher priority, right? We can't be a good friend if we constantly prioritize other things over friendship, even ministry. All ministry is supposed to be done for the purpose of loving God and loving neighbor as ourselves. If you start doing ministry for other things other than loving God and loving neighbor, then we've got the priorities wrong. Ministry is actually just the context. Programs are the context. Things that we do here, what we do here, Sunday service, it's the context in which the substance is contained, is supposed to be lived out. The substance is to love God with all heart, soul, mind, and strength, and to love one another, love our neighbors, love people, one another, but also others outside of this circle as ourselves. All those things are simply the context in which we're supposed to live out this substance. Okay? So if you prioritize something else higher than the substance you're supposed to live out, you've got the priorities wrong. You can't be a good friend. You can't be a good neighbor if that's the case. And conversely, because you can't be a good friend and good neighbor, you will not find a good friend and a good neighbor either. Jesus says this is how we are to look for, to find our good friends. Not merely by looking for them, not to look for someone who's already instantly a good friend to you, but to look for someone that you can be a good friend to. And one day they will become a true friend to you. If Jesus can do that with us, if Jesus can look at us and say, look at this bunch of, excuse the word, I describe that, I use this to describe myself. Look at this bunch of riffraffs, right? But I'm going to go out of my way to care for them and love them anyways. And now, I hope many of us have come to look at Jesus as, wow, Jesus is my true friend, right? But it all started with him being a good friend to us. So let us do that. Let us look at our lives and see where we've been rushing. Let us stop rushing. Let us look at our lives and see where we have prioritized other things higher than loving our neighbor as ourselves and loving God. And try to figure out then, in all the other things that we do, how do we use those other things simply as contexts in which we can live out this substance? It's not that I'm telling you to, for example, quit work, right? That will make no sense. But the idea is, look at the work that you have to do. Look at that as your context in which you can live out the substance, right? I'm not saying to you, stop having New Year's dinners with your family, because everyone's got a lot of those coming up, don't we? Right? But instead, look at them as the context in which you can live out this substance that God has. And he says, you go and do likewise. Then you will truly live. Let's pray. Heavenly Father, thank you for your word. Thank you for how you teach us. You show us your example, and then you still teach us with these amazing parables. And you make things real for us. And Lord, I pray that loving our neighbor as ourselves, finding true friendship, the way that you told the teacher of the law to do, will indeed be something that is in our lives as well. In Jesus' name, amen.